Right. Good afternoon. Welcome to the first session of Stream C. Hopefully you're in the right stream. A few bits of admin. So we're going to be using Slido today. So if you want to ask a question, you can do it through Slido. And if we get a chance at the end, we will try and answer your questions. My thanks to sponsors, AWS, for this. And my first pleasure is to introduce Orlando Scott Cowley, who will give us the first 5-10 minutes talk.
Thank you, Chris. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming to Stream C. I'm Orlando Scott Cowley, as Chris said. I run a team at AWS of cybersecurity consultants and advisors and architects, specialists who help you, customers, adopt the cloud securely. And a lot of what I can talk about is the experiences that we find when we talk to you as the customer. Whilst I can't help you predict the future, and a lot of what today and tomorrow about is the future, I can hopefully in the next 5 or 10 minutes give you some tools that might be good foundations for thinking about the future. The most important one, I think, that we come across quite often, where customers are the most successful in their digital transformation, is having a culture of security. And by that, I don't mean a security culture. I mean a culture of security. And there's a big difference between the two. You'll find, and you may have this already in your organizations, is that a security culture exists in the teams that's their job. You know, it's a frame of mind for those people in those organizations. Whereas a culture of security, and the thing that we try and propose to customers and to organizations, is that's driven by everybody in the organization, not just a few people. And I've got a few tools today that you can take away and you can try. In fact, one really good tool that you can try in your organizations that should hopefully drive a culture of security. And as I said, when we talk to customers, one of the most successful things that we see when it comes to digital transformation and cloud adoption is the customers that have incubated and developed a culture of security. And they're the ones that have looked at what other organizations do and have taken on some of the feedback and built their own systems, their own mechanisms. And I'll share some of those with you today as well. But this is a journey, isn't it? It's an evolution almost. And we've moved from the left of that slide to somewhere in the middle to the right, perhaps. It used to be that we talk about security as someone in IT, and that would be their job, or a couple of people. And in many organizations, that's still the case. But we're all desperate to evolve and desperate to move on. When you build a security team, then you start being a bit more mature. And there we'll find things like automation will creep in. We'll find risk will be controlled in a much more compliant manner. And there'll be mechanisms that are used to help the organization be more secure. And then as we get towards the right of the evolution there, where there's a product team or a service team running a big chunk of security, where things like DevSecOps have been involved, then we start to see things speed up. We start to see things like infrastructure as code or security as code, and things like guardrails. You'll hear quite a lot when you talk to cloud service providers. Guardrails are one of the phrases we use to say, well, within these two barriers, you can do quite a lot, and where those barriers sit is up to you as the customer. And then as you get right across the right-hand side, where everybody then becomes responsible and everyone's an owner inside the organization, it becomes far easier to innovate and scale and deal with new challenges and new innovations. So when we think about the future, and things like Gen AI are really making us think about that right now, that's when everyone can be involved. So there are 4 key components I want to give you today. You may have come across a couple of these already. Certainly, Anne and Felicity spoke about executive support this morning. That's something that we've been talking about for perhaps 20 years. It's still something that my team advise C-level executives in organizations on. Even today, we say it's got to be a top-down priority. The business, the owners of the business, the decision makers in the business have to support security. And then as we move across to the right-hand side, things like distributed ownership I'll come back to, and also psychological safety and communication styles as well. And if we can look at those 4 things inside your organization, you can begin a robust journey to a better place, I think. So as I mentioned, executive support, one of the most important things. If the boss cares, everybody else cares. And you've all heard the culture of no, haven't you? Everyone's heard the security department being called Dr. No or CISO No, and that culture, I think, doesn't really help us. So the way we think about it, and the way our CISO thinks about security and ownership, is yes, but. There's always a yes. We want to be enablers. We want to be able to drive the organization forward, not hold them back. And that's a really important point, because if you're hearing messages from senior leadership that this is important, from everybody from the boardroom to the post room, then it's everybody's job, and ownership becomes a lot easier. What also happens that follows on from that is distributed ownership as well. And as I said earlier, the organizations that do the best in terms of digital transformation and cloud adoption have somehow been able to solve this ownership problem. And they've devolved security ownership into lots of parts of the organization. And it really helps you scale. That's a really important point. We look at scalability as a way to do more with less, and arguably lots of us are doing that right now, whether it's less people, less budget, and scale has become a really important thing. So when I think about ownership, there are 4 components that fall into that. This is a 45-minute presentation I've compressed down into 10 minutes. I won't go into all 4. I just want to talk about security guardians, because I think that's one component that you can take away and you can try if you're not trying it already. Security guardians are the security conscience, if you like, of the security team in every other team inside the organization. And there's a bit of an explanation there for you. What we do is, in Amazon and AWS, is put people into, we started with service teams and development teams, people who are security champions, security mavens, inside those teams. And as I said, they become the security conscience of that team. And they're not there to say, well, you haven't locked your laptop when you walked away from it. They're not policing the system. They're there to be at check and balance and to say, in this piece of code, is everything regular? Have I noticed something? Is something wrong? But actually what we found is that customers who've adopted this have said, hang on, we can do this not just for our service teams, but also for HR, for marketing, even for legal. We have security champions across the organization, and some of the most successful customers have done that. Another key component that was on that list is psychological safety. And I think also this is something that you can try relatively easily inside your organization. But you can also take a really long, hard look at your organization and say, do we create a space for psychological safety in terms of security and compliance? If someone pulls an and-on cord or blows a whistle, what happens? Do we make it easy for people to say something? Making the right thing easy and the insecure or the wrong thing hard is a key way to do that. So remove the blame. Remove things like blaming people for clicking a phishing link. It doesn't help them learn from their mistake, does it? What we'll do, and what we encourage all of our employees to do, is if you think you've got a security problem, you have a security problem, raise a ticket. We would rather a ticket gets raised and it gets downgraded from the highest severity to a lower or medium severity than nothing happens at all. Because if someone goes home and thinks, well, I should have done something about that, we'll never know until it's too late. So the way we remove the blame is to say, raise a ticket for everything. If you think it's a problem, raise the ticket, we'll deal with it, and we'll either de-escalate it or we'll deal with it for you. You're then not, you're encouraging people to do the right thing and to point out where there's a problem and point out some weak code or some weak process. And if you want to reward them, you can do that as well. But it stops them feeling guilty for doing the wrong thing, which is what we want to achieve. And then lastly, communication and education is not something you often see in this type of presentation, I don't think. When we talk about security, we have, I think, for a long time used FUD as a way to sell things and a way to, as an industry, there's a bit of fear going on, isn't there? We think it's good to scare people into doing something. And whilst there's got to be a degree of gravity and maturity about the threats that we face, the way we talk about it can also be far more productive and supportive. So we can be far more positive. We can use a language that everybody understands, and we can use phrases that don't scare people into doing something, but make people realize that actually if I don't do this thing, then there's a bigger risk to me and maybe the organization. And again, that comes from the top down. So we roll all the way back to executive support and get the organization to buy into using that more cooperative and supportive and positive language. And when you add all of those 4 things together, you start to build a really solid foundation for improving the culture of security inside your organization. So when you look at the future and when you look at what's coming and innovation, you've got a really solid base to work from, rather than having to worry about the gaps and the holes and the problems. And if you're a follower of something like long nose theory in relation to innovation, a lot of what we'll see and the challenges we'll face in the next few years or so, we're already facing today. It will just get far more complex, as you've already heard this morning. So I'm hopeful that those 4 areas can be productive and useful for you. As I said, this is a longer presentation, which I'll happily come and present to you for hours at a time. If you can reach out to me on LinkedIn there if you wish. But for now, I'll hand back to Chris and to the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Orlando, and thanks again to AWS as a sponsor of this stream. So, yes, I'd like to introduce the panel who are feverishly waiting behind the screens. Panel, please.
Hello, everybody. Were we supposed to run on stage?
Well, it was a bit of dancing would have been good, but we didn't really have the pumping music, did we?
Yeah.
So this session is all about how do we move from the council being a nice-to-have to actually being a must-have. And over the years, at the 2 or 3 years at Cyber UK, we've seen it develop. I think it's, we're in a pivotal moment now. As Claudia said at the plenary session, we've got at least 4 of the specialisms published. And now there's an opportunity to kind of sort of move forward quite quickly. And our panel today really represents a number of organisations who can make this happen, and we can all make it happen, but particularly the sort of organisations that are on it. So what I'd like to do is first introduce the panel. Leanne, would you like to start, and then we'll move this way?
Yeah, sure thing. Hi, everyone. I'm Leanne Price. I'm the Deputy Director for the Government Security Profession based in Cabinet Office with the responsibility of delivering services to government security practitioners across government.
Phil?
I'm Phil Huggins. I'm the National CISO for the health and care sector, overseeing roughly about 140,000 organisations across that bit of the UK GDP.
Hello, I'm Mary Haig. I'm the Global CISO for BAE Systems, so big defence company, big supplier into MOD and government, and looking after quite a lot of important kit and data for the government.
My name is Stuart Okin. I can't see anybody in the audience except this blaring light at the moment. I'm the Director for Cyber Regulation for Ofgem, so we look after the energy sector. So I would argue that's probably the most important thing, because without energy, nothing happens, basically.
Cool, thank you all. And Slido's running, so please engage with it. And if you've got any questions, we'll try and get them at the end. But if we don't, we'll kind of follow up later. And it's always useful to get people's thoughts on things that we need to kind of clarify. Okay, let me start with Phil. So Phil, you've got a large organisation to look after, slightly. What do you see the benefits of the council standards for your organisation, and particularly for your supply chain, which you rely on?
Sure. We are building a health and care profession. That means translating the common standards for cyber into the health environment, understanding those areas that are specific to health, but also translating the role profiles into our existing pay frameworks, so we know what to expect of somebody of a particular profile at a particular grade, and also developing the development pathways so that people know how to get from one to another, what is expected of them in their movement. And for us, it's a really important part of our workforce building, because not only do we need to inject large amounts of new talent into the healthcare sector around cyber, but we need to be able to give people a future. We need to be able to give people an opportunity to develop, to understand where they're going. And for us, the profession and the standards that are coming through allow us to do that, to make promises that we're going to keep to them. In terms of our supply chain, that's our next big challenge. We have a massive supply chain. I would say that bits of our supply chain are the standard big tech providers. They know what they're doing. Some of our supply chain are selling us toilet paper. They can know what they're doing, and we can probably buy toilet paper a lot of places. But we have another group which are really focused on healthcare products and services. And frankly, they don't get challenged very strongly on cyber. So we're increasing that challenge, we're increasing that focus. And for us, that's not just a case of saying, here's an expectation, here's a standard, you must hit it. It's also an education piece, because it's going to take them time to understand what we're talking about. And what independent standards give us is an opportunity to point to things and say, that's what we're talking about, that there.
So just to pick up something you said there, so this isn't going to be a kind of moment in time where everything changes. This has got to be gradual, because you can't turn around to your suppliers and say, tomorrow you must meet this. How do you see it phasing in, and how do you see it sort of evolving?
Sure. At the moment, we are sort of creating a common set of expectations for our supply chain. And the goal over the next couple of years is to communicate those such that not only have our suppliers had plenty of warning it's coming, we've had plenty of opportunity to provide them the material to learn from, but actually we'll be doing some co-development with them. We are not the experts in writing software for connected medical devices. Those exist in those firms. What we do know is we need a standard that makes sure we know we're getting the right thing from them. So from our perspective, it is about being clear about what the expectations are, when that will hit, when the regulation of making sure people are hitting standards is there, because people do need a backstop and they do need to understand this isn't just a nice idea, there's a purpose behind this. But the other side of that is we've got to give them the time to catch up.
And you mentioned software there, actually, and it's probably worth a plug. So we've got the consultation coming out for the software code of practice, where there's an opportunity for people to feed in, because at the end of the day, the standard must be appropriate, whether that's for people or software or development or whatever it happens to be. So a bit of a plug there. Watch out for it. It's either come out or it's coming out, but yeah, please give your views. Mary, as a supplier, well, a large organisation who have many staff, but also a supplier, how do you see the standards fitting into your space?
So, I mean, the regulations, the standards, the career framework, they're all part of that, describing what good looks like. And the reason I welcome those career frameworks and us talking about the skills and the people is that at the end of the day, it's the team that delivers everything. And where I see standards not being implemented well, or in fact failing to land well in an organisation, is where you haven't got the right expertise and blended team, and it becomes a tick box or a kind of resistance to get into it because it's too hard to think about. So making sure that we're a bit more professionalising and a bit more prescriptive about when we say an expert, this is what we mean. When we talk about this role, this is what we mean, and that allows you to get that right blend of team, such that they can actually enact stuff in a sensible, thoughtful, risk-based way, as opposed to I'm going to read a recipe and blindly try to follow it, and that never lands well. I think it's also about retention. So, if there is a skill shortage and teams need to feel like they've got an exciting career within cybersecurity, and when you start to draw out career maps and show how they can navigate around the different roles, that's incredibly important for people as they feel like they're progressing. And hiring is really hard if we don't standardise the way we talk about things. We had an example where we put out a role and almost no one applied. And I went and asked some questions about why, and they told me the job title, and I looked at them and went, yeah, that's so boring. That's not a standard market term, and it looks really boring. As soon as you use a slightly more standard market term, we got hundreds of applicants. So us as an industry standardising how we describe roles actually can make quite a difference to the hiring process, as well as the retention, as well as the kind of professionalising.
I think that common language is quite important. It takes me back to, in government, we used to have a mandatory role of accreditor. And we used to run an accreditor conference every year. And I remember going into one year and I read through the attendee list and what their job titles were. And there was something like 40 people attending, and there was something like 40 different job titles. And you kind of think, are they all the same? Are they different? What are the skill sets needed for these? So I've certainly yearned for that common lexicon, that common set of standards. And I just want to pick up something you said around people thinking about what risks are being managed rather than doing sometimes a tick box exercise. I've done all these controls, but have you done them in the right places for the risks you're wanting to manage? And I think you've got to think, and I think that's a skill in itself around how you manage that risk, I think. So Stuart, coming to you now. Regulations based on outcomes. So skills are implicit in that outcome. So you can't look after data or you can't, maintain systems if you haven't got the skill set to do it. But it's not explicit in there at all. And how do we change that? Because that starts to signal quite powerfully.
So I'm gonna push back and say I don't think we should be explicit. I think it is a danger. I'm asked so I have the luxury of being able to speak to the C-suite all the time with the energy companies. So as a regulator, when we call a meeting with the chief executive or their boards, we always get it. There's no question about that. Why? Because we give them money and because we find them, right? So they're gonna turn up. And in those board meetings, I'm continuously asked, can you recommend a qualification? Can you recommend a product? Tell us what to do. Do you, by show of hands, do you think it's a good idea for the government to tell industry what to do? I can't see. Is there any hands up?
I don't think there are.
And we used to try, right, with common criteria.
Yeah.
We tried to do that, but in essence, it's not the right thing to do. On the other hand, how many of you would feel comfortable having a surveyor coming to survey your new house that isn't chartered? By show of hands, how many of you who run a business would not want to have a chartered accountant? So why on earth would we want a cyber professional wandering into a substation or a gas compressor in the energy market with a wrench in their hands, or God help us, with a keyboard in their hands, doing anything if they are not chartered either? So I'm very proud of what we've done. In the last 5 years, we've created thousands of roles, just under 1,000 roles in the UK in the cyber side of things. We've not dictated what the qualifications are that these individuals need to have, but we have to move to a position where there's a charter status. And that it has to come as quickly as possible, but it has to be that they'd expect it. So it's about, from the regulator perspective, it's about asking the questions. So the questions we'll be asking is, how do you know that you've assured your IT or your OT estate? And they'll come back and say, well, we've used the NCSC. How do you know inside those organizations that the individuals are professionalized, because they're chartered? It's asking those questions. So I'm going to turn one more question to the audience. Do you think it's going to be 10 years or more, so 10 years or more to get chartered status in the UK adopted across the beat? So by show of hands, do you think it'd be 10 years or more? Okay, and 10 years or less? Okay, so it's a 50-50 mix. That's interesting, actually. And I think the question today, which we should be asking, is how do we move that to the less? How do we go from, what are the hurdles stopping people from going, of course, I'd have a chartered accountant, chartered surveyor, of course, I'm going to. And the last thing I was going to say before I hand back is, going back to your message, I've built a department. We've got about, there's about 50 cyber professionals now within Ofgem, from 2 in the last 5 years. And during the interview process, I always say to them, to the individuals, I'm terribly sorry, but you're not going to get rich working for the government unless you do something unethical. Okay? You're just not going to get rich. So all I can promise you is to throw money at you for your education and your career development. So we've got 12 people that have done MSCs, 3 people that have done masters, and obviously we'll talk more about the chartered in our commitment later on. But that's what we're going to do, not to bind people to work for them. We're not going to get them to sign contracts where they have to stay, but to encourage them to stay. And that's what I think we're going to be doing, to your point. You can dim the lights down again if you want to, so people can go back to sleep.
I'm going to circle back to equivalency in a moment. So for members of the panel, have a think about the whole thing about, because you don't mandate you must have this. So if somebody comes along and says, well, I've got this instead, and how do you manage? Have a think about that. I'm going to come to Leanne first, because government has a real powerful lever for change, both within our own community, but also how we project out and contracts and all that kind of thing. How do we best use that to make the council stick?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the UK government has been on a journey with accreditation in our civil service workforce. So we're not starting from scratch here. I oversee the overarching security profession, and many of our members, over 200 people in the last couple of years, have been accredited through the Security Institute. So we've got a track record in kind of starting this process with the security community, and it's really exciting that we're doing this with the council. So what are we doing? We're going to be funding, using Department for Science and Innovation and Technology funding, several hundreds of people to go through accreditation with the Cyber Council, which is really exciting. We want to lead from the front, not just in terms of UK government, but we want our most senior leaders to be doing this. It makes a huge amount of sense, I think, to demonstrate, the examples that we used earlier. You want a really credible person leading your organisation who is managing huge, frightening cybersecurity risks in government organisations on behalf of the nation. So we want to be doing that. The other area we mentioned, you're not going to get rich working for the UK government, but we do have tools in our armoury. We've got digital and cyber pay, and accreditation really helps us make a case for specialist skills. It gives us that external benchmark to say these equivalently qualified, equivalently certified people have X% differential, and I'm a HR professional, and one of the things that me and my team do is help departments make that case for the cybersecurity professionals in their teams. I think there's also something that we are really keen to do within UK government. We run apprenticeship schemes. We run a fast stream cyber programme. At the moment, those aren't connected to council and accredited routes. We want them to be, and they will be soon. So it's a really exciting kind of part of the journey. The other thing that we need to look at is when we're advertising jobs, do we want to start specifying, particularly at the most senior levels, we expect people to be working towards this accreditation or to already have it. We haven't made a decision on that, and I'm really interested in the views of the community inside and outside of government around how far mandation is part of this conversation. We see it with other professions like the legal community. So a really interesting set of debates for us to have, but we are putting our money where our mouth is. We're sponsoring people to go through this. We're building that community through mentoring and sponsorship as people go through that chartership process. And it's going to be really exciting to see where this goes.
I mean, certainly from a GCHQ perspective, as head of profession, I've got about 22, 23 people who volunteered to go through the process. So I think that leading by example is a really important thing to do there. I just want to touch on equivalency, because I think we touched on this at the plenary session, because you do need the skills to judge equivalence. When somebody comes to you and says, well, I'm not chartered by the council, whether it's chartered or whether it's principal or whether it's the new practitioner level, but I've got this thing over here. If you haven't got the skills, how do you manage that? Mary, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that's when we can end up with a disparity across the sector. So for a really big company with a big cyber team already in there, you've got people who know enough to ask the right questions and poke and tease apart, to your point, so that, if you like, kite mark on it, that marking that immediately tells you the quality isn't so important. But for a small company who's hiring their first cyber professional or going out to the services market to hire people in, they don't have that luxury. And so it's kind of one of those good community player things, I think, of we have to professionalise and demonstrate in a clear way to everybody across the, if you like, the digital ecosystem, whether they've got a huge company or a tiny company, you have to have that quality mark around it to cover. So that means, although I might not need it to hire professionals, it would make things a bit easier for me, and I ought to do it for the good of everybody else. I ought to get on board with all this, which we are. I think it does matter, and it has to become a market lever. So, you were talking about what the Cabinet Office can do. Cabinet Office issue a supplier questionnaire to all of your suppliers. We pay a huge amount of attention to that. We really mind, and that's quite a soft measure in a way. You're not saying I won't have you as a supplier, depending on your answers. And the questions are all sorts. They cover environmental, modern slavery. There's a load of cyber questions. And the beauty of these types of schemes is it's incredibly measurable. So you could start asking how many of your cyber professionals are chartered or at this level, and we could tell you. And that would tell us immediately that you care about that, and you're doing that across the industry. So I do think it's on all of us to have a very transparent way of saying, yes, these are the different levels of expertise that's out there.
I think for me that's really important. When we formed the NCSC, we formed it from a number of different organisations and understanding what skill sets we had. So you don't know where you start from, how do you know where you're going, kind of thing. And that's a constant for me. Phil, any thoughts on the equivalency side, given you've got such a large organisation?
So this is part of a global economy. You know, a large part of our specialist suppliers are American. We are never going to be able to change their training and accreditation paths for a global business for which the UK is part of their economy. I think it's an important and useful thing. I think there's a role in government in bringing that equivalency across different global regimes. What does it mean to be chartered in the UK? What's the equivalent in the US? How would we accept that? I think that's a really important piece. But apart from that, there is just such a wide variety of skills now in cybersecurity. I know later on we might talk about the roles and how many there are, but you know, back before I had all this white hair, cybersecurity was something that one person could understand. It's now become a collection of deep specialisms, and they grow and a vast rate. So I think my concern would be we will always need some level of equivalence, because as we are learning to do better at cybersecurity, we are developing these deep disciplines for which we are unlikely to have a high level accreditation for, because it will be something very specific. And I think we need to have the space to allow for that equivalency, to allow for that ability to respond to our increasing knowledge.
Yeah, and I think it is, you know, it's an ever-evolving field. And I think on that note about specialism, so it isn't a greenfield site, you know, we're trying to marshal a lot of stuff that's already out there into something that looks reasonably sensible for people. And you're right, I mean, so even the council, there was a startup project that was run by the IET, and the 16 specialisms that they came up with. I think we've got a question for the audience at this point in terms of whether people agree with the specialisms or not. There you go, as if by magic. It appears. So you get your say. So do we think, in part of me is, at least we've stopped talking about cybersecurity skills, because sometimes I get frustrated because it's like talking about medical skills. We need more medical skills. Is there more doctors? Is it more brain surgeons? You know, what is it that we actually need? And we talk about cybersecurity skills, and there's very different specialisms. So, Stuart, thoughts on the specialisms, or any other challenge you think that...
Okay, so I'm going to be a bit controversial. I'm kind of looking at the too many area. So I think the specialisms are good as a way of understanding the gateway into the sector. You know, so if I'm starting my career and I'm interested in, you know, where should I start? But I think largely after that point, it becomes almost meaningless. So I kind of sit in that sort of too many category, because you can sit there and define this thing 16, 20. I mean, in my space, actually, I wouldn't want to take any of those 16 and let them loose in a SCADA system inside a gas compressor. And, you know, it's not going to happen. They better be a chartered engineer, or as well as being a cyber specialist, and certainly an identity access management guy is not going to go anywhere near that or a tester. So, you know, it's not that maybe I go with the grey hair. In my world, I see there's only really two specialisms. You either come up the development route, so you're a developer by background, so you know what a non-check buffer is, and you understand buffer overruns, and you understand that research, and you come up the development route, or you come through the infrastructure route. And those are your skill sets, and then there's overlays of whether you've become a little bit more specialist in one particular area. But I think there really is fundamentally, really, you're either a developer or you're an infrastructure chap or chapess, and that you've come through there. And then depending on your personality, depends on where you want to go. So you might not, if you've got that type of personality that's going to make you an auditor rather than a tester, the different types of personalities that will orientate you that. And I don't think you need to you need to define a skill set for personalities. I mean, we'll be doing Myers-Briggs for everybody for the rest of our lives. You will end up going in that direction that suits your personality. So maybe it's a bit controversial, but I think there's probably two. Simple
so you've gone for 2. So you've gone from whatever we are, 16
to
2. Okay, interesting.
2 core. And all these, but don't get me wrong, I think the specialism, I say, it's having it there to understand your route in is not a bad idea. Yeah, okay, I'll start as a SOC analyst and see where my life takes me. Fine, okay.
Okay, Mary?
I think it depends what you do with it. So I think it's useful to have a description of the different roles, partly, as I was saying, about that hiring process and about that that idea that you can move around between them, so a career map. I think if each of those specialisms, if each of the 16 had a chartership associated with it and you had to get a new chartership each time you hopped, I think that would be bad, because that's a barrier to movement around, and some of them are really quite complementary. So, if I had someone that was a pen tester, quite a specific profession, and they wanted to get into, I'll call them a technical risk assessor, they're probably going to be able to move into that really quite quickly, because they're used to looking at the configuration of a system, thinking about MITRE attack routes, and they'll be able to do all of that quite well. If you've got someone who's slightly counterintuitive, but a generalist risk person, and they want to step into that really technical attack path mapping piece, that's actually quite a big hop. So if I was an employer, I would want, if I'm hiring someone that's a real expert, I'd want them to have a chartership, and then depending on the role hop they're doing, would depend on whether I'd want them to re-charter or not. Yeah,
and I'm picking up on what you're saying there. In essence, if there would be chartered for each 16, which I don't think was the intention anyway, I'm hoping it's not intention, but everyone would go for the generalist anyway.
Yeah,
They'd end up, you can move around. Yeah, so you can move around. So.
Okay, Phil, any thoughts on, or you? Yeah.
I mean, if I could jump in the government security profession, which, as I mentioned before, includes physical and personnel as well, we've got a 600-page career framework. The issue that I think we have in producing these frameworks or these standards is that people want to see themselves in it, right? People want to see very tangibly how what I'm doing can lead to a accreditation, a chartership, whatever it might be. If I'm a recruiting line manager, I simply want to know whether someone's good, and what we need to do, speaking for the HR community, is work with the council to ensure that we can decode what these different things mean for different audience groups. I actually think 16 feels like quite a good number, but
let me challenge you on that. What you said is absolutely fine at the beginning of your career. I think, again, by show of hands, how many of anybody in the room there, the career went exactly to their plan? So you sit there with your 600-page document, which incidentally I've read, as you'd expect me to do, and you sit there and go, I'm going to map it this way through, and therefore I should end up becoming a CEO at the end of it. Life just doesn't work that way. Never has done. I mean, I always say that I think I'd rather be lucky than good anytime.
So I think I sit halfway between you, Stuart, and the 16. So I think we're in about 7 or 8, cool, which you can't necessarily move easily between, but having that mapping is quite important. Phil?
So one of the concerns I've had for some time is, as we have specialised across cyber, we've lost one of our routes to our senior leaders. It used to be, I mean, again, I go back to maybe 2007, 2008, I could say I had done most jobs in cyber. After about that, it got away from me. In developing somebody to lead on cybersecurity, if they've spent 20 years in a specialism, they've suddenly got to start making informed decisions across a whole set of areas where they don't have expertise. And I think the developing specialisms is a reflection of our increasing knowledge of the issue and how we approach it. I think it's a absolutely appropriate way to work. But I am concerned that we are not going to grow our security leaders of the future by keeping people in specialist silos. I think that's going to cause problems in later career. And the only other thing I'd say is, at some point, I'm sure one of the specialisms will be a CISO, and that will be fascinating because there are so many different types of CISO, they'll have to choose one. And what does that do for everyone that's not that type of CISO?
I think you're. It's a really difficult balance, I think, because at the moment we have a lot of people who've done that breadth, but we're missing the specialists. We create something that gives us the specialists, as you say. Do you then miss the people who've got the breadth? And I suspect you end up in this sort of pendulum swinging back and forth. But to a large extent, that from a GCSQ NCSE perspective, it's all about trying to help people with their careers and giving them support to give them different areas to work in, so that they are developing maybe a few different specialisms. And I agree, chartered ones would be great. But ultimately, it's down to individual organisations as to how they see their people developing. But you're right. I think it's, and we've seen that ourselves, that we've developed people with really good technical skills, but then, which we needed because we didn't have them, and then but they're not maybe as broad as we needed them to be.
There's no framework or system that the UK Security Council can put out that will take away the need for organisations to think about the blend of their team.
Yes.
That's always true.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. We can't push everything to the council and say, go fix my problem. It's got to be how we develop people and how we move people and give them those experiences. So I'm conscious of time. I'm just going to ask each of the panel members, what commitment will you take away that will make the council a must-have over the next few years? Not tomorrow, but over the next couple of years. And what would you challenge the audience to do in that time frame as well? And I'll add to the end of that if there's time. But should we start? Jan, do you want to start at your end?
One of the things that hasn't come up in this conversation, but I was really struck by in a conversation I had earlier with the council, was around the barriers to entry for accreditation. So how do we ensure that becoming a certified member of the council is open to all, regardless of background, whether that be on the grounds of neurodiversity or working pattern? Going through that as an individual is, it can be a real undertaking. How do we ensure that there is a support mechanism, that there are adjustments made in the process for different types of people? Because we've all agreed and kind of heard throughout today that diversity is going to be one of the most important areas for successful cybersecurity teams, successful organisations overall. So I'd really encourage you to think about your own kind of journey in becoming accredited, if that's appropriate to you, but also what barriers there might be and working as an ally to overcome them with your colleagues.
Phil?
So we are building out this profession in cyber for the health and care sector. Currently we're aligned to the government framework. It's quite likely as the profiles come through we will shift and be aligned to the Cyber Council. So that will become our sort of core definition of what it is to be a cyber specialist in what we do. The diversity question is interesting. I myself happen to be autistic and have ADHD, and my career path follows exactly what you'd expect of a drunk spider, and in terms of how I got to where I got to. For some people, the structure of a development framework can be constraining. So I think with everything, it's going to be about applying it in a way that's sensible, that's useful, but doesn't limit our options. But yeah, we will be adopting the profiles as part of our overall framework adoption.
Thank you. Mary?
We've taken the council's career framework and we've embedded that into our cybersecurity already. In our budgeting round, we're going to put in money for the corporate membership, but also to encourage people into the chartership routes. So that will go into budgets and then into people's development plans. And as you were talking, another idea came to me. We should do the Women in Cyber piece that I run within BAE, running workshops on this is how you get it, it's not a barrier to entry, you know, and helping coaching people through that I think will be important, because that does worry me a bit. And then there's a timing thing around how we ask suppliers and ask for it on job adverts. So I think we can start asking for it in a soft way, and we ought to start doing that. And then at some point, when there's enough momentum with it, we'll switch it into a hard requirement for some job roles, and a hard requirement for some of our suppliers. And I think it's actually, if I think about how we assess the risk of suppliers, we do a lot on, have you got the certificate and that certificate, but asking as a proportion of their cyber workforce how many chartered people they've got, that's another great measure that we can start asking for. So it'll be about timing as to when we do that informally versus formally, but I would like to start doing that to get leverage.
Cool, thank you. Let's do it.
3 things. We're going to do 3 things. First off, learning and organisational development inside our organisation in the cyber profession is incredibly important, as I said. We're actually 10 points above the civil service norm, 15 points above our rest of our colleagues in Ofgem in terms of development and training. So we haven't mandated it, but we've gone around our cyber profession and we've asked how many people want to do it. We've now got 2 that have said that they want to go for charter status, and another 3 that are considering it. I think it's a personal thing at this point. I don't think we should mandate it to any individual. So we've got 2 and 3. So that's the first thing. That's within our team. Second thing is we've got Brian Lilly from the council coming to speak at a forum that we run called Figure, which is the energy industry and the academics and the suppliers, key suppliers like ABB, GE, Schneider's, etc. They get together in Manchester in June, and Brian's going to come and address that audience to try and push the charter status to the regulated industry. And then the third thing that we're going to be doing is we're obviously going to be incorporating NCSC's consulting, NCSC's testing, and NCSC's assurance framework as a way of making sure the energy companies are doing the right thing from cyber perspective. And we are going to, again, ask the question, have you got the right qualified people inside those accreditations to go and do those assessments when you go off and you audit an energy company, when you test an energy company. So those are 3 commitments.
And from an NCSC perspective, we've already implemented one of our commitments, which is we will use the council standards within the service offerings that people provide. So you need to go through that route. And the other thing from the people within my profession is basically I want to get them all on the register at some level. And we talk a lot about charter, but I don't think that's necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's important, but there are other levels, and it's important that we see where everybody sits so we can put that development around them and provide them with the right support they need. So it's really important. So I think we're going to put the Slido back up from the first one to see if anything's changed. And I can't remember what the first lot was. That'll be interesting. Are we going to put it back up? Yeah, no, maybe. Oh, yes, it's coming. After listening to the panel debate. Oh, no, it's not there. There you go. So you get a quick chance to give some feedback. And while you're doing that, I'd like to thank the panel for coming along and sharing their thoughts with us. A round of applause, please, for the panel. Don't stop putting your Slido in. If we didn't get round to any of your questions, sorry about that. We will look through them and sort of do something on a website somewhere, no doubt. Other than that, I hope you have a good rest of Cyber UK. Please come to the Ecosystem Zone if you want to find out more, because we've got the council there, various other things. Have a good rest of the day, and thank you.